So do you see a sense in which that R&D spending or that investment in people in the private sector could be replicated in, say, Silicon Valley or the pharmaceutical or biomedical industries in the present time? Are there silver linings that you detect in the present circumstance?
I think the biggest silver lining, as I said, is that we're still, I think, benefiting from the diffusion and refinement of technologies associated with the information technology or the ICT revolution. You know, the trends in private sector R&D, one can be an optimist or pessimist on that. There's I think my sense is, and I'm not, you know, as deeply into that as some other specialists might be, but there's considerably greater emphasis now on the development now than on the research in terms of, you know, putting money into something that can have an immediate payoff. You know, there are some firms like Google which, you know, I think are prepared to, you know, throw some darts and
basic science.
Some science, yeah, exactly. But I think my sense is that in a lot of other areas that are conducting private R&D, you know, really very heavily focused on the bottom line over the next 2 or 3 years.
And Fred Block, who was in your chair once and talked with me about his book, The States of Innovation, has said that development work is happening in the private sector. That's all the more reason to have the basic science done in the public sector. And obviously something like the National Institute of Health produces a great deal of benefit that's registered as private productivity in the pharmaceutical industry.
I mean, I think the Depression brings mixed lessons, you know, depending on your political perspective. I mean, if you like the private sector, you can say, wow, this was, you know, an incredible success story for private sector R&D. But on the other hand, you know, if you look at the infrastructure side, you can also say that the idea is that well-chosen public infrastructure is some sense a contradiction in terms, just doesn't hold up from, you know, if you look at the Depression experience. It can be done, and it can be done, at least in an ex post fashion, very successfully.
I don't know if you have data on this, but what happened to the development of universities and the education system through the Great Depression? Did it wallow, or did it?
I think it kind of pretty much held its own. Actually, if you were a professor, you did pretty well during the Depression, because, you know, you generally kept your job, and if you managed to keep your job, your real wages, like just about everybody else, if you kept your job, your real wages went up.
Yes.
There was not a big expansion. I mean, the big expansion of the U.S. higher education system, of course, happened after the Second World War with the GI Bill, and then followed by Sputnik, and of course all the science-based investment after that, and then followed by the demographic effects of the baby boom.
Because I would say there's so much discussion now about human capital augmentation.
Right.
I didn't know if there was a parallel.
Well, I mean, people, you know, we can look, in terms of human capital, the contributions of human capital to, say, total factor productivity growth. There were increases in the overall educational attainment of the labor force, but they were fairly modest. So if we're talking about human capital, I think, frankly, there's probably a greater contribution among the relatively smaller number of those most of whom are highly trained, those R&D workers, as opposed to sort of a huge improvement, in spite of the increase in high school completion rates, in terms of a huge improvement in the educational qualifications of the labor force.
Okay. Well, I think this has been a fascinating tour to the, I would say, the supply side economics was big in the 80s and 90s in America, but little did I know there was such good news about the supply side in the 1930s and 40s.
On the positive side, exactly.
That's right. Yeah. But it's fascinating to see what you've created. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to your future writings and to interact with you again and again.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.